If you're a pro football fan looking for all the latest news and action, you've come to the right place. This is the Football Game Tonight podcast, where we're going to cover all the latest buzz from around the National Football League. I'm your host, John Kuzma. Thank you guys for tuning in. We have another great show for you guys today. On the ticker, we're going to do the Ja'Marr Chase story. We're going to talk a little bit about Saquon Barkley. We're going to talk about Jaden Daniels. We'll do the Caleb Williams story, and we're going to talk a little bit about Bo Nix. So we're going to start with Ja'Marr Chase. So if you want to know who the best wide receiver in the National Football League right now, who that is Ja'Marr Chase. This guy was absolutely sensational last year for the Cincinnati Bengals. And the gap between Ja'Marr Chase and everybody else was pretty big last year. This guy was on a different level from everybody else. And I remember, just a couple years ago, everybody's talking about Justin Jefferson, Ja'Marr Chase's teammate at LSU. Remember him, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Ja'Marr Chase, they all played together at LSU. They won that national championship there. And fast forward to now, it's actually Ja'Marr Chase who's the best player in the National Football League. And it's just amazing what this guy has been able to do. So much of, obviously, Ja'Marr Chase's success goes back to the relationship that he has with Joe Burrow, because those two have been kind of fine-tuning the quarterback and wide receiver relationship that they have going back to LSU. So when you have all those reps together with, the same quarterback and the same wide receiver, it kind of puts them ahead a lot of the other quarterback and wide receivers in the league, because they've been, ironing out the wrinkles for so long, just going back to their college days playing together. But man, what that connection has turned into now, it's terrifying for the rest of these teams in the league, because how do you game plan for Ja'Marr Chase? This guy has always been somebody that is good on the outside. He's always been able to get over top of the defense. He's always been able to run and consistently get separation. But now you're actually seeing him be fearless when he goes over the middle too. So it's just the little details in his game, Now, instead of just being that primarily outside receiver, he's not afraid to go over the middle. There's no fear in Ja'Marr Chase's game. If he has to take a hit and absorb the blow for his team to move the chains or to generate some offense for this Bengals team, he's not afraid to do that. So you have to applaud Ja'Marr Chase for being fearless too, but it's also the confidence that he has being more mature now that he's been in the NFL a little bit longer too. Because, early on, you are still wondering how you're going to stack up in the big leagues. Now Ja'Marr Chase knows that he owns this league. It's his league that's there for the taking. I think he's proven that to himself, where he knows, hey, I can dominate every single game in the National Football League. Doesn't matter if it's week 1 in the regular season or in the playoffs. I think he's ready to go no matter what the situation is, because he is that damn good. Nobody can cover Ja'Marr Chase right now. Now, I understand that the Bengals have to get back to the playoffs, and then he can showcase what he can do against the best defenses in the league. Remember, they went to the Super Bowl, came up short, and they're still trying to bounce back from, coming up short after, making it to the Super Bowl. Haven't been the same team since. But Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow have certainly made strides. Joe Burrow last year played lights out. Ja'Marr Chase last year was the best wide receiver in the National Football League. Somehow the Bengals found a way to keep Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins. So they're doing a really good job of making sure Joe Burrow is taken care of. And I like those decisions. Yeah, it takes a hit on the salary cap to keep everybody. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions in the National Football League. But they're thinking about things through the lens of, let's take care of Joe Burrow. And if you really want to take care of Joe Burrow, you pay Ja'Marr Chase, then you find a way to keep T. Higgins as well. So Joe Burrow is surrounded by weapons. That's exactly what the Bengals were able to do. So I like those decisions. Is it risky because you're running up the salary cap? Absolutely. But I think with having Joe Burrow there, with having someone opposite of Jamar Chase that can take attention off of Jamar Chase, if you have T. Higgins, it's a little bit harder to double team Jamar Chase because T. Higgins is a guy that can get open, get separation himself. A very good wide receiver, a very talented player in this Bengals offense. So I agree with the decisions that the Bengals have made, and Jamar Chase is just electric. I think that's the simplest way to put it. The guy's electric. It doesn't matter what you do. If you try to double team him, I just think that the way he's so smooth in his route running and how deceptive he can be in his route running, I don't think it's going to work. I think what ends up happening is you end up getting two defenders lost because they can't stay on Jamar Chase's hip, and that's an extra defender that you could have used somewhere else, on that defense to maybe stop maybe the tight end or the other receivers that you have to line up against. So you think, double teaming Jamar Chase is a no-brainer, and yeah, you use your best corner and then you take the free safety and try to rotate him over top Jamar Chase, but it's like sometimes, and Bill Belichick used to do this a lot. Sometimes Bill Belichick would just put his best defender on the top receiver and then stack the coverage against the other players and take everybody else away and say, hey, we're going to wave the white flag on their very best player. We're just not going to let anybody else beat us. And, Bill Belichick actually had a lot of success doing that all those years that the Patriots had the best defense in the NFL under Bill Belichick, because he knew sometimes, like, hey, if we put an extra defender over there, it doesn't matter. We're probably still not going to stop them. So let's put the extra defender over on the other side and make sure we don't get beat at all on the other side. And then we'll put our, top cornerback on the top receiver and try to limit the damage there. But, sometimes Bill Belichick's thought process on that was, we don't want to overcompensate and still get burned. I don't know if maybe that's the approach you go with Jamar Chase. You just put your best cornerback on him and then you stack the other side of the field and make sure the other side of the field with T. Higgins doesn't beat you. Because, like I said, if you overcompensate on Jamar Chase, are you gonna stop Jamar Chase? I have my doubts. I have my doubts that stopping Jamar Chase at this point is even possible. That's how damn good this guy is, because last year it was proven that nobody was capable of containing Jamar Chase. It just isn't going to happen. He runs too well. He understands the wide receiver position too well. And the connection that he has with Joe Burrow, they're just, their rhythm and timing is just unmatched. And at this point, Joe Burrow knows exactly where Jamar Chase wants the football to be thrown to, whether it's outside shoulder on a fade, whether it's, quick right away on a slant. They have all those little nuances of the quarterback and wide receiver position figured out already. And at this point, it's pretty obvious that they have it mastered. Because like I said, going back to LSU, all those reps, now being together with the Bengals, they got it mastered. And it's down to a sweet science at this point between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. You just better count your days if you go against those guys, because they're going to burn you. They're going to burn you. They're going to put up huge numbers. They're going to score touchdowns. And it's going to be deflating if you're the opposing secondary, just because you're outgunned. You're outgunned by a quarterback and a wide receiver that are just better than your secondary. There's not much you can do there. Really, that's all I got on the Jamar Chase situation. Hell of a player that is, I still think he's going to get better, honestly. As good as he was last year, the best wide receiver by a wide margin that led every category as a wide receiver, I still think he can get better. And I think that tells the true story of just how good Ja'Marr Chase is. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, to me, last year, the best players in the National Football League, without a doubt, were Lamar Jackson, Saquon Barkley, and the guy we just talked about, Ja'Marr Chase. They were the best players in the National Football League. They separated themselves from the pack. So when I talked about Saquon Barkley going to the Eagles, leaving the Giants, after all those years with the Giants, going to the Eagles, a division rival, but, the Giants paid Daniel Jones, basically paid Daniel Jones first, didn't take care of Saquon Barkley. He goes to the Eagles, a division rival. I knew right away, I'm like, wow, they're going to have a good shot of winning the Super Bowl. I actually did an episode on this podcast that you can go back and listen to at the beginning of the season, talking about how Saquon Barkley is going to give the Eagles a very good shot at winning the Super Bowl because of the system. It was the system. I remember how good that Eagles offensive line was and how good their execution was. Even after Jason Kelce left, they still executed on another level because they still got Lane Johnson and they still got Landon Dickerson and the rest of the guys they have on that offensive line. And when you watch that system, how they run those zone plays so well, and how the line gap on overs perfectly, and the running backs that they had before that were always having really good success, whether it was DeAndre Swift or the rest of the guys that they had there. They were really good. And I'm like, if you plug Saquon Barkley into that system, a guy that is leaps and bounds better than DeAndre Swift, no disrespect to DeAndre Swift, but Saquon Barkley is a different beast. We all know what he was at Penn State. And he goes back to the state of Pennsylvania, goes to Philadelphia, and it's a match made in heaven for the Eagles. Saquon Barkley added another gear to that offense. Yeah, they've always had A.J. Brown, and they've had Jalen Hurts. They've had Devontae Smith. There's weapons all over the field, but when you add Saquon Barkley to the mix too, look what happens, because him in that system with those zone reads, and now even if they don't hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley, if Jalen Hurts pulls the football, keeps it himself, and then takes off and runs with it. We all know how dangerous of a runner Jalen Hurts is. It's just too much to game plan for. It's too much to game plan for. There's options all over the place. You can run zone read all day with just Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, because if you just hand it off all day, Saquon Barkley's going to beat you. Once the defense starts to kind of figure out how maybe we can slow that down a little bit, Jalen Hurts starts pulling the football and takes the zone read himself and starts running and breaking off big gains and moving the sticks for the Eagles offense. Oh yeah, you still have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. There's weapons everywhere. So you just knew that this was going to be such a potent offense, to the point that it ended exactly where I said it was going to end, in the Super Bowl, with the Eagles absolutely dominating the Chiefs. The Chiefs, who up until that point were a dynasty. But it didn't matter because the Eagles won so convincingly in that game. To me, that says that the Eagles have a very good shot at repeating, because I look across the board on this offense. A.J. Brown's still there. Devontae Smith still there. Saquon Barkley still there. Jalen Hurts still there. I mean, that offense, they still got all their dogs. And now they have the confidence of winning the Super Bowl. At this point for the Eagles, the question is, will they stay hungry or will they become complacent? Because if they stay hungry, they're going to have a real shot at going back-to-back, then winning another Super Bowl. It's going to be, you have to believe they're the favorite to do so, the way that, Howie Roseman is, finding these players and plugging them in, and they're turning into, Pro Bowl players and all pros and or just key pieces to the Super Bowl winning puzzle. They are so stacked, and this is such a well-run football team that it's like it's amazing. And I just don't see them dropping off too much at all. I see them being right in the driver's seat again. I see Saquon Barkley picking up right where he left off in the perfect system for him, where there's always some daylight to run to. He's going to find those creases. Then it's off to the races because that's what Saquon Barkley does. I think Jalen Hurts Jalen Hurts takes a lot of flack because they think that maybe he lacks a little bit of arm talent, but what Jalen Hurts lacks in arm talent, he makes up in leadership. He's an inspirational leader. And we saw when, I think it was a couple years ago, when maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when Jalen Hurts got hurt, and I remember Gardner Minshew came in, it wasn't the same football team. All the weapons were still there, but it wasn't the same football team. Why? Because Jalen Hurts takes command of this team, has the right attitude, the right mindset, and that gets guys to lock in. He inspires his teammates. That's what Jalen Hurts does. There's a reason he won a Super Bowl. Then you get him Saquon Barkley, and look what happens. It's like adding Nas to a race car. Yeah, it was already fast, but when you put that NOS in the trunk and you give him that little red button, that's what Saquon Barkley did for this team. He put NOS in the trunk of this Eagles offense, and they're just blowing past teams because they were already faster than everybody else. And now they run like the wind, man. They're so fast. They're so athletic. You got A.J. Brown, a big target. Devontae Smith, who's fast. Former Heisman Trophy winner. How do you compete with all that? You don't. That's why the dynasty that is or was the Kansas City Chiefs got routed in that Super Bowl. That wasn't a close Super Bowl at all. It wasn't close. The Chiefs blew the doors, the Eagles blew the doors off the Chiefs. It wasn't even close. So it's a really fun situation to watch just because it's football played at its peak form where everything's firing on all cylinders to the point where, teams end up getting dominated by the Eagles because there's just so many different ways to beat you. So many different ways to beat you. Like we talked about, when you have all those weapons on the field, you take away one, there's another one that always pops up and finds a way to beat you, whether it's Devontae Smith going down the sidelines and making a big catch, A.J. Brown just dominating in the red zone, Saquon Barkley just always pumping life into this football team by breaking off big chunks of yardage, by moving the chains. Just feed it. You feed Saquon Barkley. You feed him and you feed him. He gets better the more carries that he gets. And then what happens to the defense simultaneously? They start getting deflated because it's like you're trying to keep up with Saquon Barkley. It's just not going to happen. He's fast, he's explosive, and he's strong. So he's just everything you could ever dream of when it comes to a running back. And a guy who had, you could say one of the best seasons we've ever seen for a running back. To have the success that he had and then cap it off by winning the Super Bowl, I mean, that was a dream come true for Saquon Barkley individually. Obviously great for the Eagles too, but individually, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better year from Saquon Barkley. Goes to a new team, hits the ground running with the new team, lights it up, and then caps it all off by winning the Super Bowl. It was a storybook ending for Saquon Barkley. One that, will go in the history books of the National Football League just because it was one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen for a running back. Sure, we've seen some really good ones. I think about Barry Sanders, think about all the other greats that we've had. But to finish it with winning the Super Bowl too, I mean, that's an exclamation point on the end for Saquon Barkley. That tells you just how good of a year he was able to have. So I was so impressed with Saquon Barkley. I was so impressed at the impact he had for the Eagles, just how much more of an edge he gave that football team, because that was already a really good football team, but man, he made that edge sharp. And like I said, it ends with him hoisting the Vince Lombardi trophy. The best signing, a year ago, the best signing of the offseason, because it was the signing that got the Eagles over the top. Moving on, we're going to talk about Jayden Daniels. And Jayden Daniels is a special story too, because you think about the Washington Commanders football team, all that they've been through, Daniel Snyder, the name change, there was a lot of dysfunction around that football team. Their owner gets sent packing. They have to change their name. All the other dysfunction. I think about Trent Williams. They failed. He had cancer, and the doctors failed to diagnose it and put him in a lot of danger. He demands a trade. And finally, I think he sat out for, what was it? He sat out maybe like a year and then ends up with the 49ers. It might have been longer. I think it was a year. I'm not certain. It's been a while, but I know they failed to diagnose his cancer. He was frustrated. He didn't want to be a part of the Washington football team anymore. Sat out, just decides I'm not going to play rather than being a part of this team. Eventually ends up with the 49ers. But stop and think about that. All the dysfunction. Owner gets sent packing. They have to change their name because there's racial undertones to the old name. Trent Williams, their best player, one of the best offensive tackles in the whole football league, says, your medical staff, failed to diagnose my cancer. I'm done. I don't want any part of this team anymore, and just walks out on them. And then along comes Jayden Daniels. Wow. It was going so bad for this football team to the point where there was no hope on the horizon. It was so bad for Washington. It could have been so bad for Washington if things didn't take a turn for the better. If they didn't get this lucky break by getting Jayden Daniels, it would have been so bad for the Washington Commanders. And don't get me wrong, I know they got new ownership, and I know that they got a new head coach in Dan Quinn. I guess everything that they did to improve their situation, they hit on all of it. The new owners, I believe it's Josh Harris and Magic Johnson, new head coach, Dan Quinn, and then getting Jayden Daniels too. Wow. You want to talk about taking a team that was down in the gutter and taking them to the top, the very top of the NFL to the point where they're a real deal football team, a true contender, and have a shot to win it all. That's the Jayden Daniels impact for the Commanders. And it was so fun to watch. A guy that, Caleb Williams went over him, but a guy that just was such a splash for this football team. Comes in right away out of LSU, a guy that was so good at LSU. Similar to Lamar Jackson in his skill set, very athletic, fast, but also don't overlook just how good the guy is up top, too. When I say up top, I mean in his head. Very good in his head. Very poised, very mature, and obviously he's focused. I don't think anybody can argue with me on those three things, because There's no way he has the success that he had a year ago without those things. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible. He came in from day one and he was locked in. That's Jayden Daniels for you. That's who he is. That's why he was able to have so much success as a rookie for a team that hadn't had a lot of success in a long time. Let's face it, they weren't one of the premier teams in the National Football League. You know, we talked about all the dysfunction they had. It's hard to be a premier team in the National Football League with all that dysfunction. I would say they were a bottom tier team. You know, obviously they drafted him, second overall? Behind Caleb Williams? So that tells you how bad the state of the Commanders truly was. As a rookie, what's he do? Takes him to the playoffs and goes on a deep playoff run. The game that stands out to me is the Lions game. I mean, to go and beat that Lions team, and the game that, you know, if you look at roster-wise, that Lions roster is pretty good. Now, don't get me wrong, they had some injuries, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. But that Lions roster, with the weapons they have and that offense, we all know how good the Lions offense has been the past 2 years. Lions have been more explosive than just about anybody. They've been more explosive than the Chiefs. I mean, they put up a lot of points. And for Jayden Daniels to go win that football game, to me, it's just like, wow. That's, regular season success is one thing, but to go into the playoffs and beat a team with that kind of firepower, it says a lot about Jayden Daniels and how bright the Commanders' future is. Because that's a huge win that proves that the Commanders are, like I said, the real deal and a team that other teams have to fear now. What do they do this offseason? They go out and get Deebo Samuel, add another weapon. I talked about Deebo Samuel on the last podcast. I think the Commanders have to use him a little bit at running back because I think when he's playing wide back with the 49ers, playing wide receiver and running back, I think that's when he's the most dangerous. If you go out and trade for a guy like Deebo Samuel, you need to get as much out of him as you possibly can. So if you have to line him up in the backfield, 5-10 carries a game, starting the second half of the season, do it. Because with Jayden Daniels under center, with Deebo Samuel out wide, but also, you know, when he does his best work is when he's taking some handoffs out of the backfield just because he's so good at breaking tackles. That adds another dimension to this Commanders offense. I think that's something the Commanders have to really think about doing. Another big moment I think about with Jayden Daniels is the Hail Mary. The Hail Mary against the Bears. You know, when you're a truly great player, there's a little bit of magic there. There's a little bit of magic there. Something that you can't explain. Something that is just a little bit more than everyone else. You can't see it. You can't quantify it. But you know it's there. And I think about that game against the Bears when the Bears thought they had it in the bag. Jayden Daniels throws the bomb. Who was it to? I think it was like Noah Brown. They catch the Hail Mary in the end zone, and just another pivotal moment in Jayden Daniels' career where you're like, hold on, this is something different. There is something special here. You have these new owners who are the complete opposite from Daniel Snyder. You have Dan Quinn, who seems to be the right guy for this football team when it comes to leading after the success he had with the Cowboys, a really good defensive coordinator with the Cowboys. Remember, he was with the Atlanta Falcons, too. They went to a Super Bowl, came up short, but he kind of bounced back with the Cowboys as a defensive coordinator, goes to the Commanders, seems to be the right guy for the job. So you look at the three levels. You look at ownership is better, coach is better, and then you nail this franchise quarterback that's a rookie. And there were signs every step of the way, right from the get-go, right out of the gate. He looks good. He looks explosive. You see why he was so good at LSU. And then he's pulling off miracles, throwing this Hail Mary in a game that looked like was slipping away to the Bears. And somehow he flips the switch, sprinkles a little magic on it and somehow finds Noah Brown in the back of the end zone. Touchdown, Commanders win the game. And you're like, oh my God, you don't see that anymore, to the point where I think the NFL Hall of Fame took like maybe the ball and maybe Noah Brown's gloves, and I think they put them in the Hall of Fame just because it was such a legendary moment, man, where it's like, it was special. It was a special moment, and it just added to this legend of Jayden Daniels that's been growing and growing. It starts, like I said, him hitting the ground running and being an electric football player. Early on, we're like, man, this guy looks like he's surpassing Caleb Williams. Maybe the Bears should have took this guy instead of Caleb Williams. And then, boom, hits a Hail Mary and takes a game, like I said, that looked like was slipping away to the Bears and turns it into a win for the Commanders, takes the team to the playoffs. That catches your attention. The huge win over the Lions in the playoffs. How can you not love what Jayden Daniels brought to this football team? How can you not love it? It's amazing what he's been able to accomplish. And the future is so bright for this guy. He turned this team around. They look like a team that is going to be in the hunt for a while with Jayden Daniels under center. So, like I said, I think he's just going to keep getting better. I think the future is bright. And the Commanders added Deebo Samuel. If Deebo Samuel can lose a little bit of weight and, find a way to get back to playing his best football, maybe that gets the Commanders just a little bit closer to winning that Super Bowl. We'll see. I think if the Commanders want to do it, they have to line Deebo Samuel up at running back, especially in the playoffs, at least 10 times a game, and get him some touches. But Jayden Daniels, he's one of the main catalysts of all this success with Commanders, because I don't think this turnaround happens if you don't have him. Moving on, we're going to talk about Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams, I look at the Bears offense, and historically, the Bears have struggled a little bit on offense. I think about the Bears teams like 85 Bears, great defense. I think about Brian Urlacher. Think about Peanut Tillman. They've always had really good defenses, but the offense has always been a little bit behind when it comes to the Bears. Well, they get Caleb Williams, first overall pick. And think about some of the best Bears quarterbacks that they had. Obviously Jim McMahon, Jay Cutler, took them to the playoffs. The Bears quarterbacks, the bar isn't that high. So when you look at Caleb Williams, he could go on to be the best Bears quarterback of all time. It's within reach for Caleb Williams, especially when you see what he's capable of in the pocket. I mean, when I look at those other quarterbacks, and don't get me wrong, Jay Cutler had a huge arm. And physically, Jay Cutler was really good. Where Jay Cutler lacked at was leadership, could have been a better leader. But when you talk about the physical build of Jay Cutler, huge arm, strong body. I remember he did the bench press when he was coming out of the combine. Hit the bench press, over 20 times? I think it was like 23 times or something like that. Jay Cutler was a strong guy. Jim McMahon, made some plays, when he was under center back in the day for the Bears. I still think about like Rex Grossman. I think Kyle Orton was there. To me, physically, it's got to be between Jay Cutler and Caleb Williams. Physically, if we're just going off the physical abilities, it's got to be between Jay Cutler and Caleb Williams. Now, as much as Mitchell Trubisky was limited with his arm talent, Mitchell Trubisky was pretty strong physically. I'm not going to take that away from him. He was a good runner. He was pretty strong, and he was a physical quarterback. But the problem with Mitchell Trubisky is he lacked the arm talent. So to me, I'm looking at the best quarterback of all time for the Bears, who could it be? It's in reach for Caleb Williams. There's no doubt about that. I think when you talk about total package, it's probably got to be Jay Cutler, but I think Caleb Williams can surpass Jay Cutler and be the best Bears quarterback of all time. When I look at Caleb Williams in the pocket, I mean, good poise in the pocket, very poised in the pocket. And when I watched film on him, the thing that stood out was he had a really good connection with Rome Odunze. And Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams were doing a really good job at stretching the field vertically. I thought those two were on the same page when it came to throwing the football down the field. It seemed like Odunze was able to run under Caleb Williams' passes and pick up some huge gains for this Bears offense. They seemed to be on the same page when, Caleb Williams would uncork it and let it fly down the field. So that's a very good sign for the Bears. I think Caleb Williams can be a little bit better leader than Jay Cutler was, because Jay Cutler had a cannon. He did. He had a cannon. He was just so aloof and, was to himself a lot, and, sometimes maybe didn't buy in as much as he should have, maybe relied too much on his physical abilities. But I think that shortcoming for Jay Cutler can be, something that Caleb Williams doesn't fall victim to. I think Caleb Williams is going to buy in a little bit more. I think he's going to want to win a little bit more. And I think, Caleb Williams cares about, bringing his teammates along a little bit more, inspiring his teammates. We talked about how Jalen Hurts inspires his teammates. I think Caleb Williams can inspire his teammates more than maybe Jay Cutler did. So to me, it's like, yeah, for Caleb Williams, a guy that can, stretch the field vertically. We saw that with Rome Odunze. And I think those two coming in together and being able to grow together, being on the same page from day one, and what Odunze was able to do at Washington, Caleb Williams at USC, Pac, what was it, Pac-12 guys that, Pac-10, Pac-12, I think it was at the end there. I think them being out there in that same conference and knowing of each other and coming into the NFL together, being on the Bears together and being able to grow together, and two young guys that are finding their confidence in the National Football League while they hash things out rep after rep, because really it comes down to the reps, all those reps together, just like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were able to get on the same page because of all those reps going back to LSU. I think having Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, starting their careers together with the Bears, and all those reps they're going to get together, I think that's eventually going to pay off for the Bears, because you could see shades of what it's going to be when they were both rookies. That first year they had together, you could just see that there was something there. They were starting to develop this connection that was like, okay, if they keep working on this together, there could be something really special there. Just because I saw one pass where Caleb Williams just drops back and he just lets it fly, man. I'm telling you, you don't see too many passes where you're just so blown away by the quarterback's ability to just let it fly. I'm talking about downfield, high in the air, one of those arcing passes that you used to see Russell Wilson throw a lot when he was with the Seahawks, where it goes up high, arcs, and then drops right in the breadbasket, right to Rome Odunze. I was like, okay, if that's how they're starting their careers off, then we might see them really start to click eventually, because that's ahead of where a lot of wide receiver our quarterback wide receiver tandems are right out of the gate. They were ahead of the curve. I saw Caleb Williams hit Odunze in the left corner of the end zone for a touchdown. Nice play there. They're clearly on the same page. And, some people might be like, Rome Odunze, we would have liked to see a little bit more as a rookie. But I think people are too hard on rookie wide receivers in the NFL. Like, people were trying to say last year that Marvin Harrison Jr. had a bad year as a rookie. I completely disagree. I thought he had a really good year as a rookie. If that's his first year as a rookie, I think the ceiling is very high for Marvin Harrison Jr. And people were like, Rome Odunze, he was good, but he was just barely good. I don't think that's the case, man. I think he was pretty good as a rookie. I think he set the bar pretty high too. And when I look at the plays, because people get caught up in the stats, I look at the plays and I look at the plays that him and Caleb Williams were making. It's like, no, there's something there. Sometimes you got to develop it a little bit, but there's something there, which is the most important thing. Because you got to have something there before it can grow into something even better. And if you don't have anything, now you're searching just for something. You're throwing anything at the wall to see what sticks. I think there's something there with Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. So, very bright future for those two. Caleb Williams, I think, like I said, I think if he stays healthy and he sticks around with the Bears for a while, I think he can be the most talented and the best Bears quarterback of all time. Because I'm looking at the other guys, like even Rex Grossman, not that great. Kyle Orton, not that great. Jim McMahon, good, but I mean, I know Rex Grossman, I'm pretty sure they went to a Super Bowl, but talent-wise, it's Caleb Williams all day. And then you get to Jay Cutler, who has the talent, but, when you don't have anything that Jalen Hurts has, you don't have the leadership, you don't have that it factor when it comes to inspiring your teammates, it holds you back. And all the talent in the world that Jay Cutler had, because Jay Cutler was bombs away, huge arm, strong guy, but without that it factor when it comes to leadership, being able to inspire people, and really being able to connect with the people around you, you don't really fulfill your potential if you can't do those things. Whereas I think Caleb Williams can do those things. I think he can lead. I think he can inspire, and I think he can connect with the players around him. So I'm looking at all the Bears quarterbacks from all time, and I'm like, man, I really do think Caleb Williams can be that guy. Now, does he stick around when it comes time to sign a contract extension? Does he stick around and stay with the Bears, a team that drafted him number 1 overall, a team that believed in him? Because, he went to USC, was out in California. There was rumors, coming out before he got drafted that he didn't want to go to the Bears. But I feel like sometimes, you look at a team that was historically bad on offense, and you're like, maybe that's not the right fit for me. Now that he's there, it's like, he has Rome Odunze. He has, a new head coach in Ben Johnson, a guy that came over from the Lions, a really good offensive coordinator with the Lions that is going to help put that offense in a good position. DJ Moore's there. So they have some pieces that can, it's getting better for the Bears. Things are clearly going in the right direction. It's taken a little bit, but it's going in the right direction. Back to Ben Johnson. He was really creative and a guy that is very strategic. I think he's going to be able to game plan some opportunities for this Bears team on the offensive side of the ball. I think, they're going to be able to get some guys running free at the wide receiver position. I think they'll add some new wrinkles, maybe some bootlegs, just some more creative plays that are going to be advantageous for the Bears. That's what you're looking for when you bring in an offensive-minded head coach like Ben Johnson, who was really good with the Lions, who was one of the driving forces in the Lions' success. You know, they were very creative with all those playmakers they have. Like I said, they were one of the highest scoring teams in the National Football League, the Lions were. So to be able to take Ben Johnson's creative, kind of mad scientist offensive approach and add it to Caleb Williams and to Rome Odunze, to DJ Moore, and the rest of the weapons they have on this offense, I think that's a good move for the Bears. I think it's going to be good for Caleb Williams just because you need this offensive mastermind that can find a way to get the most out of all these offensive players, which is the most important thing for an offensive-minded head coach who almost acts as an offensive coordinator too, because I do believe Ben Johnson will be calling the offensive plays just because that's his strength, going back to his time with the Lions. A guy that was coveted leaving the Lions. A lot of people wanted to hire Ben Johnson. The Bears land him. He goes to an NFC North rival from the Lions to the Bears. We all know how far that rivalry goes back to. The Lions and the Bears have been playing each other since early 1900s? I mean, it's been a long time since those two teams have been rivals, and those two cities, Detroit, Chicago, always been rivals. So I think that's an interesting storyline between the Bears and the Lions. You know, you have the Lions' old offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, jumping ship over to the Bears, teaming up with Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze. We'll see if Ben Johnson can, stick it to his former team, the Lions, because they're going to play each other twice a year in the NFC North. That's an interesting storyline to keep an eye on. But Caleb Williams, it all starts and ends with him. If he can fulfill his potential, like I said, he's got a chance to be the best Bears quarterback of all time, especially when I'm seeing those plays on film and just how much they jump out at you. You're like, this guy is poised. He throws the ball incredibly well. He can run a little bit and throw on the run. There's some things there that obviously compelled Ben Johnson to take this Bears job because he liked what he saw from Caleb Williams. Enough where he was willing to stay in the division of his old team, the NFC North, and just go the next, go over to Illinois. I almost said the next state over, but I think Indiana is actually between Michigan and Illinois. You got to go Michigan, Indiana, then Illinois. But the next, I guess you would say, the next team over in the NFC North division, and a big-time rival. That Bears-Lions rivalry is pretty big. It's pretty special. So to see Ben Johnson jump from one team to the other, to link up with Caleb Williams, NFC North rivals, it's going to be fun to watch that one. That's one you guys got to have circled on your calendar because we'll get to see how Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams perform in that game against Dan Campbell and that Lions team. Moving on. The last topic we have is the Bo Nix story. So when I look at Bo Nix's situation, and a lot of people were like, Bo Nix is so great. There's no doubt that Bo Nix overachieved, but there's one thing we do have to recognize, and it's the true story with this Broncos offense and the Broncos situation as a whole. The Broncos are having success and getting better, clearly getting better, because of Sean Payton. Sean Payton is an offensive mastermind. I look at the best offensive minds in the league. Obviously, Andy Reid. I think Sean Payton. And I think Kyle Shanahan are at the top of the list. I know Ben Johnson is pretty good too. But those top three guys, Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and Kyle Shanahan, are on a different level. Those are the three best offensive minds in the National Football League when it comes to coaches. Andy Reid's the best, Sean Payton's the second best, and I got Kyle Shanahan third. So the reason this Broncos team is getting better is because Sean Payton is just an offensive mastermind. So good at what he does on a different level than basically anybody in this league other than Andy Reid. I mean, Kyle Shanahan's close, but Kyle Shanahan hasn't got it done. Sean Payton has. And I go back to those Saints days and what Sean Payton was able to do with Drew Brees. Where at one point Drew Brees was the all-time passing leader, and just all the yards that he put up. I think Tom Brady ended up passing Drew Brees, and I think Tom Brady is number one now. I'm not certain. Don't quote me on that, but I know at one time Drew Brees was the NFL's all-time passing leader. And who was his coach? It was Sean Payton. And all those offensive game plans that they came up with put Drew Brees in a position to be the NFL's all-time passing leader. And I think about when Drew Brees went down, the other players they plugged in always had success, whether it was Taysom Hill, whether it was Jameis Winston, whether it was any other of the quarterbacks that they plugged in, they ended up having success. And it just goes to show that Sean Payton has such a good offensive game plan that even when Drew Brees went down, and whether it was Jameis Winston, whether it was Taysom Hill, or any other quarterback that they plugged in there, Teddy Bridgewater was another guy. Those guys, when they got their shot and their number was called, they were still able to be productive in that Sean Payton offensive system. Why is that? Because Sean Payton is so good at what he does. So when we get to the Bo Nix situation, the real story, first and foremost, is Sean Payton is so good offensively that it puts his teams in a position to succeed. If you take Sean Payton out of the situation, you just put Bo Nix in there, it's going to be a lot harder for Bo Nix to have success. But because Sean Payton's so good, you put Bo Nix in this system that is conducive to success, and Bo Nix takes his opportunity and he runs with it. And Bo Nix, as a rookie, really good. Showed a lot of promise. And like I said, he overachieved. So you do have to applaud Bo Nix for that, because he was good enough to step into the system and make the plays that he needed to make. So you can't just give it all to Sean Payton, but Sean Payton is the driving force. And then you team him up with Bo Nix, which leads to Bo Nix's success. You take Sean Payton out of the equation, you just put Bo Nix there, it's a lot harder for him to have success. But because you team these two guys up, it leads to Bo Nix being a really good football player in the NFL. And there's more to the story with Bo Nix. Like, one thing, when I plugged in the tape and I watched Bo Nix, one thing that stood out to me is Bo Nix is a better athlete than I ever realized. I saw him play at Oregon. I think he was at Auburn before Oregon, but I caught a game of him at Oregon. I think maybe a game. I watched some more at I caught a game of him at Auburn, excuse me. I watched more of him at Oregon with the Ducks. And the one thing I didn't notice when I watched him at Auburn or I watched him at Oregon is I didn't notice how good of an athlete he was. When I plugged in the tape with the Broncos, I was a little blown away at how good of an athlete he was. His ability to run and move the chains. How he's a little bit explosive as a quarterback when he tucks the football and runs with it. So right away, the one thing that jumps out at me is, okay, this guy's a better athlete than I realized when I saw him at Auburn or I saw him at Oregon. Because you saw him at Oregon and that system at Oregon was just so good that it was like everybody's fast, and it seemed like maybe he was surrounded by talent at Oregon, and I knew he was good, but there was just so much talent and everybody was fast at Oregon. It was kind of hard to judge Bo Nix. But when you get him in the pros on the Broncos, the thing that jumped out to me is like, okay, one thing I miss with this guy is he's a better athlete than I thought he was. Like, he has some escapability. He's clearly a little quicker, on his drop back, and when he steps up and he throws, he's a little quicker when he gets through all that than you think he would. So there's a little explosiveness there that I might have missed when I was evaluating Bo Nix. Another thing I kind of noticed is like, okay, his mechanics are pretty good. So when you have a good athlete, a better athlete than you realize, and his mechanics are really good, what happens is he's transferring his kinetic energy really well. And I don't know if anybody's ever played baseball that's watching this. When you crow hop and you make a throw from the outfield, that crow hop allows you to transfer your kinetic energy a little bit better, and you have more velocity on your throw when you throw from the outfield to the infield or hit your cutoff man or whatever it is, or make your throw to the plate like Ichiro used to do back in the days. Well, that crow hop helps you load up and charge up your energy and transfer that kinetic energy better, and you have a better throw with more velocity. One thing I think that's happening with Bo Nix is he's so sound mechanically with his dropbacks and his steps, and he transfers his energy so well that he's transferring his energy well throughout his throws. And you combine that, the efficiency of his mechanics with him being a better athlete than most people realize. You combine those two things together, and what do you have? You have a guy that's very efficient, kinetic energy wise and mechanics wise, and transfers his energy well throughout his throws, kind of like what I talked about with the crow hop with the outfielder who crow hops and throws the ball a little bit harder. He's able to do that by keeping his weight under him with his dropbacks. And then when he steps up, he's a better athlete than you think he is. So he's a little bit more explosive and he's a little bit stronger than you think he is. So he can put together some good throws because of those things. Those were the things that kind of surprised me when I watched tape, where I'm like, okay, you add Sean Payton's creativity and Sean Payton's system and how Sean Payton is able to teach these guys and develop them so well because he's so good at what he does. Okay, what's Bo Nix's side? Because it's not all Sean Payton. The majority of it is Sean Payton. But what is happening on Bo Nix's side? Very good mechanically, better athlete than you think he is. And then you look at the weapons around him. Courtland Sutton, really good player. They bring in Troy Franklin, a guy that he played at with Oregon. So not only on the field does it help having Troy Franklin, a guy that he got reps with at Oregon. We talked about how good Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow were because of the reps they got at LSU. You have another situation like that with Bo Nix and Troy Franklin because they were getting reps together at Oregon. So I think that's going to help both their career trajectories, having that familiar target for Bo Nix, Troy Franklin. And Troy Franklin was a guy I liked coming out of Oregon. I thought he was really explosive at Oregon, a guy that probably should have went a little bit sooner in the draft when he came out. So, and then off the field, having Troy Franklin, someone that he spent time with at Oregon, it's just a familiar face, someone you know. And when you're a rookie and you're getting to know everybody, and at least you can go to Troy. Troy is going through the same thing, trying to learn all these new names and memorize all these new faces and dealing with the playbook and new coaches. It's just someone that you can kind of rely on. Not just Bo Nix relying on Troy Franklin, but Troy Franklin relying on Bo Nix as well. So it's a back and forth thing where they both benefit from the situation. So I think that was a really smart move by Sean Payton. It's little moves like that make your quarterback a little bit more comfortable. That gives you a wide receiver that maybe is overlooked a little bit, that later on down the line can be a contributor for this team. I thought Josh Reynolds, Bo Nix and Josh Reynolds had some pretty good chemistry that past year. I thought those two were clearly on the same page where they were making some good plays together. So that's the Broncos situation. Sean Payton sends Russell Wilson packing and they take this massive cap hit, but they say, hey, think about the long-term process. And yeah, we're going to take a salary cap right now by sending Russell Wilson packing, but we're going to get this guy on a rookie contract in Bo Nix. And when we get him on a rookie contract, because we don't have to pay a quarterback. It's going to free us up in other areas later on down the line. We all know a lot of these teams have a lot of success with a quarterback on a rookie contract because now you can pour money into your defense. Now you can stack your offensive line, get wide receivers. Sometimes you can build a better team overall with a quarterback on a rookie contract because these quarterback contracts are so big. So they have Bo Nix on this rookie contract. That's what their move was. Obviously, Sean Payton and Russell Wilson were never on the same page. Sean Payton decides to make this bold decision where he's like, hey, I know Russell Wilson has some success in this league, but I'm going to send him packing. Give me Bo Nix. It ends up being a great decision for this Broncos team. They get Troy Franklin. Josh Reynolds was on the Lions. He comes over to the Broncos. He was a good role player for the Broncos. Courtland Sutton, I think, is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the National Football League. Guy that's very big, very strong, guy that can go up and get the football. I've always been a big fan of Courtland Sutton's game. Always thought he was really good. So it just goes to show, man, you add these little pieces. They had Courtland Sutton, and who'd they send packing? They sent him to the Browns. Jerry Jeudy. They send Jerry Jeudy packing. They send Russell Wilson packing. Think about that, to send Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy packing. Those are bold decisions that Sean Payton makes. Decides, give me a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. Decides to bring Josh Reynolds over after he's kind of cast off by the Lions. Decides to draft Troy Franklin so the two Oregon players can be on the same page and, kind of lean on each other as they, try to make a name for themselves in the National Football League. Those little decisions, couple big decisions, and Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy to send them packing. Those were big decisions. Little decision that had a pretty big impact, getting Josh Reynolds. A little decision getting Troy Franklin later on that ended up having a big impact for both Bo Nix and Troy Franklin. So, being able to build a football team with, sometimes these little decisions that have big impacts by getting a cast off Josh Reynolds, by getting Troy Franklin later on in the draft and pairing him up with Bo Nix. That's why Sean Payton is one of the smartest head coaches in the National Football League, a guy that's won a Super Bowl. And I think about some of the other head coaches that have won Super Bowls. They're kind of like, okay, they won a Super Bowl, but it was kind of a fluke. And the guy that kind of jumps out when I think about that, kind of Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson wins a Super Bowl with the Eagles, goes to the Jaguars, hasn't been the same coach that he was. Maybe a little fluky. Maybe the Eagles just had a really good roster and it was more about the roster than it was about Doug Peterson. I don't feel like that's the case at all with Sean Payton. I think Sean Payton is one of the smartest coaches in the National Football League. I think there's a reason his offenses were always so good. I think there's a reason he won the Super Bowl. So when I put Doug Peterson and Sean Payton next to each other, I have one coach, Doug Peterson, that his Super Bowl feels a little fluky, and I have one coach, Sean Payton, that's like, oh yeah, there's a reason that guy won the Super Bowl. So Sean Payton is the first piece for the Broncos. The next move is send Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy packing. You get Bo Nix, you get Josh Reynolds, you get Troy Franklin. Ends up being this perfect storm for the Broncos. Some really good decisions by Sean Payton. And then Bo Nix in that system, being able to be developed by Sean Payton. His sneaky athleticism, his really good mechanics. That's what allowed him to come into the system that was already primed for success and then take that opportunity and really run with it. I'm John Kuzma. That's all I got for this latest episode of the Football Game Tonight podcast. You can check us out wherever podcasts are found. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm signing off.